So I'm very excited to have Miss Cora here with us today. If you're watching this video, it's probably because you either are on your LSAT journey, you're getting ready to start your LSAT journey, or maybe you just finished and are just coming back to do some remembering of what your journey was like. But without further ado, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Nicole. So again, my name is Cora Wilkie. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and so that's why I do have a little bit of an accent, not a lot. Where do I start? My journey. Let me give you a little bit of information about myself first, to why I got to my journey. I was in the Air Force for 10 years, so in 2000 to 2010, so right before 9/11. And then I did a year-long deployment in Iraq. Came back with a lot of issues, not physical issues that you can see, but a lot more of just trying to deal with everyday life, PTSD. I came back with migraines, insomnia, just a lot of more psych things that were kind of going on. And then from there, I tried to go back and I try to get into this the civilian world. And so this is in 2010. And going from the traditional structure of the military to trying to be in the civilian side was not an easy process for me, or for a lot of people who do that transition. And I quickly learned, very quick actually, that when you go for your job interview and you start to talk about, or at least I've always been told, bring up your disabilities because you want them to know about them ahead of time. And I would bring them up and they would actually say that my disabilities are not covered by the ADA, which is the American Disabilities Act, in interviews. And then I started keeping my disabilities quiet, and then would bring them up after I got hired and say, hey, I have these issues. There's sometimes I can't work 8 to 5. I might need to come in at 10 o'clock and maybe can work later because of migraines, for an example. And again, I would get
And just
told,
how serious were your migraines? I think sometimes people think migraines and they're like, oh, I get the occasional bad migraine. And then there's the far end of the spectrum.
In a month, I would at least get 28 to 30 migraines, and to the point where if I'm on day 3 or day 4 of a migraine, I have to go to the ER, because that's normally where I have to get some very strong medication to get rid of the migraine. Then normally 2 days later, I would be back on it again, or not back on it, I would get another migraine. It's called a cluster, where they last for days on end. I've gotten so many, or have tried so many different things. I've tried injections right into the nerves, right into the nerves, like right in the back of the head. I've tried everything out there that anybody, if you Google migraines and treatments, I've tried it. And it has taken years, and I'm talking about years, almost 20 years now of trying to get those under control.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to.
Oh, you're fine. I did describe like what it's not. No, this is not.
Because,
this is not a headache.
Yeah, I actually had interpreters when I was younger, so I can relate just a little bit in the sense of I used to get what they called status migraines. And so I didn't get them as often as you, but when I got one, it would last like 7 days. And so I would miss weeks of school at a time. And it's hard for people to understand, like, well, why do they last? For me, it was like, why do they last so long? But after I would have it, it would be exhausted. I would be exhausted for days afterwards because they take like everything out of you.
They do. And then you also have my kind of migraines I got the aura. So out of nowhere, I would get blurry vision or black dots. And then I knew a migraine was about to start. And then from there, I'm very sensitive to temperature. So anything with heat, I was very sensitive to. Light. So even in my offices, I always have to make sure all the fluorescents are turned off, and I switched them out. So there's a lot of sensitivities, and I would get very nauseous and very sick. And the pain, it's hard to describe the pain because it's so severe. It feels like a jackhammer is in your head, and that you really can't function. And then
you don't care that you're not functioning, right? That's what's hard for me to explain to people. If anybody ever said, well, this is really important. Can't you just do it this once?
Mm-mm.
All desire to do anything goes out the window because you can't think about anything other than the jackhammer in your head.
Yeah, that pain, that's all you can think of and focus on, and it consumes you. And it's very hard to describe that if nobody has ever experienced a migraine before. And
Right.
so I'm glad you asked that, because it's such a lot of people just think it's just another headache, just, push through it. And it's,
Take some ibuprofen, Cora.
yeah.
All right.
Let me
So
get that with the concoction that I normally do.
okay, so to bring us back to your story, you were sharing that you got to the point where you were no longer disclosing or sharing your disabilities in your interview. So then what happened from there on?
So then I didn't disclose them in the interview, and then I got hired for a job, and then I actually told them that I do get migraines very often, and there might be times where I can't come in at 8 o'clock in the morning, which was my scheduled time to come in. And I was let go, fired actually, because they actually said that we hired you to work 8 to 5. You have to be here from 8 to 5. And I told them, well, it's based on a disability. And they say that disability you're talking about is not covered by the American Disabilities Act. Because what they're doing is they were literally looking at this sheet of paper and they're check marking, okay, are you in a wheelchair, or, like physical things. And there's not a lot of mental ones that are on there, or that weren't covered years ago, or protected. So, and so with that, I actually started talking with, I got involved with the Iraqi Freedom Women's Group when I was in Charleston, South Carolina, and got involved with that group. And we started talking about and sharing stories of our experiences of trying to go into civilian life. And then, and how difficult it actually is. So it took me quite a few different tries before I was able to find an employer that was that could be flexible with me, because in that time frame, it's hard in the corporate world to find somebody that can be flexible. They're in corporate, it's so used to 9 to 5, and if you can't do that, then we're not going to hire you. And so that's what has driven me into the human resources field. I've been doing human resources on the civilian side now for 10 years, but in total, because that's kind of what I was doing in the military too, for over 20 years. And it really has now pushed me on the HR side to understand what is a disability. So when I'm talking with somebody that's across from me, and if they automatically say they have a disability, I know, and from me on the HR standpoint, that is not something that I can, that I cannot discriminate against. And it's really understanding disabilities, or what kinds of disabilities. There's so many. It's not just cut and dry, black and white anymore. And doing a lot of research.
I have a couple questions on that.
Okay.
One is you said that you understand disabilities, which is amazing. And two, there's a difference between like not on paper discriminating, but also not finding a different reason to discriminate, because I think that happens a lot, is that, oh, we're not discriminating for this. We actually just, this other person. So it's really holding yourself, like your personal bias, accountable.
Yes.
And two, do you ever have conversations with people who are like, well, this is what this job looks like. Is this the best? Like, would this make you happy? Because do you think sometimes, depending on the disability, there might not truly be a good job fit? And it's not that you want to discriminate against them, but
then also,
is that an honest conversation with them, or is that because you don't want to put someone in a situation they're going to be miserable?
Right. And the other thing too, I always ask too, here's your job description of what you could be doing. Does that, when you read over it and you read over all the demands or whatnot, does it look like something when you could enjoy, could see yourself doing? Is it something that's possible for you to do?
Or with some adaptations could be very possible, and you could thrive, because I'm sure you want these people to thrive in their job.
Exactly. And that's the other thing too, is that in corporate world now, or just any kind of work environment, everybody, it's 2020, you've got to learn how to adapt and evolve and be flexible with your coworkers, and also the people
value them.
Yes. And that's so important nowadays. And it's not just, let's send out a survey and everybody answer, I love my company. Actually, listen to your everybody that works underneath you and with you. It's all about listening and having empathy and caring too. These are people you're with 8 to 9 hours every single day, if not longer, sometimes 10 hours a day.
I once listened to a podcast that said you should know what every single person that reports to you is driven by. And someone's like, well, they're all different. And they're like, well, that's the point.
Yeah.
That's what you need to know what matters most to your employees so that you can try to do your best to reach them where they're at.
So maybe I'm hoping in 4 years, I can be part of the new wave of employment, putting out some new rules or something of helping companies look at how to better, how to keep and retain their employees.
Do you think part of that is too, like a lack of guidance? Like we say we want this, like what does this actually look for a large corporate company to offer these flexibility to their employees? Is there a lot of structure? Maybe there is, and I don't know, but I could see that being a route too, is these are some ways that you can do this.
Well, if you got to put a team together, if you're thinking of, okay, if we're going to add some flexibility to, let's for an example, a law firm. Law firms are traditionally 10 years behind the corporate world. And what I mean by that is they still like to print everything and everything is on paper compared to the corporate world now, everything's electronic. For COVID, actually the silver lining of what we're going through right now with COVID-19 is that it forced a lot of companies, especially law firms, to go electronic. It also forced us to go remote. My law firm, for example, for the staff, for non-exempt employees, were never allowed to work remotely at all. It was a no-go. If you aren't in the office, then you're taking a vacation day. And so this actually has shown that it's possible for us to work remotely and
still get your work done.
Yes. And that's the thing is, it's hey, I'm still able to do the same thing I can do in the office from my couch with my 2 cats sitting next to me. I can do the same thing. And we're finally able to prove that. And which is that's huge for a law firm and for any kind of corporate business that is going through the same thing this year. They're able to realize just how flexible they can be. With that, though, they're also learning how much money they're spending on. Anytime you have an office, guess what? That's that space that you're paying for, and they're probably also looking at that too. How much we're paying for all this space that we can cut down on.
I can relate a little bit to what you said about. So I also get migraines, not to the level that you do, but my sleep and time zones can definitely affect my migraines. And when I previously worked in the corporate world, we were expected to be in the office 8:30 to 5 as well. But I traveled a lot. And if I would get back from a trip of like long days where I wasn't getting much sleep, I was sleeping in a hotel that wasn't my bed. And even if I just landed at 9 or 10 o'clock and I would go get home at midnight, you still have, it's still like we talked about earlier about, whenever you have migraines or you struggle with this, you have to have your preparation to go to bed, and it takes a certain amount of time. I physically could not go to work at 8:30 the next morning every single time I went on a trip because I would get migraines, or I would wake up, I would try, and it might not be that first day after the trip, but it was like the second or third day after the trip because it caught up with me, especially if I crossed over to a time zone and there wasn't as much flexibility there, or you could take a quarter day and use so I used so much vacation time for migraines, even though I was working 40 plus hours a week, but it wasn't during those traditional hours.
How did your employer, how did they treat you with your migraines, if you don't mind me asking?
I just always took personal time. Yeah. So I think it definitely just depended on who you reported to. And I think that, so we don't need to talk about me anymore, but that would be a good conversation. But anyway, okay, so you have this awesome, I don't want to use the word awesome, you have this very real experience. You are now it sounds like at a law firm that really respects the value and like the work that you can do, which I'm sure being someone with military experience, which thank you for your service, Cora, of course. But in addition to that, you probably like being in the military, you're a really strong, I would assume, this is an assumption. Okay. So it's a flawed, but I'm assuming you're a really hard worker. You live, breathe, die your job.
Yes.
I'm guessing you're very loyal. I'm just thinking all of the traits that we think of when we think of a soldier.
Yes.
And so I can only imagine like the personal heartbreak or the personal pain of like feeling like you're not good enough or that they don't think you're working hard. or that you don't
Oh,
want to work?
yeah, I'm constantly,
Like, do you have that over like the imposter syndrome,
yeah.
or that like, oh, I'm gonna get fired, I'm gonna get fired, or like, oh, I'm not doing enough?
Oh, do you know,
Feeling?
every single day I'm talking with my director and I'm asking her, you know, what can I take off your plate? Because I want to prove to her that I'm, you know, I'm valuable. I think I'm always trying to prove that I am a valuable person on this team, because there's a team of 5 of us. So I'm constantly asking her, I'm asking our payroll manager, our benefits manager, how can I help you, or how, you know, give me more work.
Let me work twice as hard in the
Like,
hours that
I'm
I
crazy.
can work to make up for the mornings where I have to handle my migraine.
But I will say that working here, out of every job that I've ever had, so this was my first law firm. I've always, before this, it was corporate and then Air Force. And this has been my favorite job just because the environment that I'm in, they actually celebrate staff appreciation. And when I was in corporate, we never celebrated staff appreciation. So there's a lot of where you feel like home, you feel at home, you feel like you have a family. But my family, which is my my teamwork, my workers, I didn't say that right. The people that I work with, my team, we really do care about each other, and they understand. And what I have to learn is when I'm in pain or if I'm sick, it's okay to call out, because I would come to work with a major migraine and shut all my lights off. And my boss would come by and she's like, Cora, if you don't feel good, go home. And I almost have to be like, are you sure? Is this really okay? Because for me, it's still very difficult to grasp that it's okay to go home.
The norm, or when you're different, because it's like, well, yeah, but then you might let me do this, but you're still thinking differently of me.
Oh yeah.
And
oh yeah.
that
I don't want them
I would fear.
Yes,
I
don't
did
want them to
fear.
think I'm taking advantage of it either.
Right. And it's so real
Mhm.
that how do you constantly run that balance? Okay. Have that balance. So then you've been in this position. So why law school?
This has actually been something I've been thinking about. So I've been at this law firm for 3 years, probably 4 years now that I've been thinking about this. So when I was in my younger 30s, so I'm 38 now. So probably when I was 33 or 34, I was trying to figure out how can I do better at human resources, or yes, human resources is you run a lot of reports, you welcome your new hires, or you do the terminations. There's a lot of what you do every single day can be very, very the same, monotonous.
Okay.
And so I was trying to think of what can I do that will get more into the policy. And I started researching there, and it was employment law. And so 4 years ago is when I first started doing researching about what employment law does. And then I was thankful to get this job where I got to see what an employment law team does, because we have lots of different teams in our law firm. We have 400 people, so it's not very large, but it's medium sized. And I got to actually talk with them. And I asked one of the attorneys, I'm like, what do you love about your job? And what do you hate about your job? And she actually had nothing negative to say about being an employment lawyer. She thinks that and we have corporate law, tax law, bankruptcy, and all of that, and real estate. And she said, compared to the rest of the different positions in our firm, she thinks she gets more back from her clients, which are companies and human resources directors, because she's helping them along the way and learning everything, especially with COVID-19, all this, everything keeps changing with employment, and she's helping them be better companies. And that's what I want to do.
That's awesome. You're convincing me that I need to go into employment law.
It really has to be something that you're passionate about. I don't think just anybody just randomly is going to say, I want to be in employment law. It's got to be something that you've got to already want. That's what I think.
Yeah, and you have to really, value people and value differences, it sounds like, and also be like a problem solver.
100%. And that's what your job is going to be directing corporations how to interpret the law and how to do it where you're protecting them and their employees. And that's what it's all about. And I mean, that's the bottom line of what an employment lawyer does.
So you decided to go to law school and then you realized you had to take the LSAT. So
Oh, yeah.
you're like, I wish I would have known then, so I wouldn't have started. No, I'm just kidding.
I wish I would have started 4 years ago.
Like, it would have taken the whole 4 years.
I know.
So you said that you're 38, so you've been probably out of undergrad for 20 plus, well, maybe not, but you've been out of high school for 20 plus years, right? So
Yes.
I haven't taken standardized tests in a while.
It's been 21, 22 years since I've done a standardized test.
So when did you start studying for the LSAT? And what were your first thoughts when you started diving into it?
Oh my God, it felt like a foreign language. That's literally how I translated it to anybody I talked to. I'm like, this is a foreign language. It felt like, learning Russian or something like that. Nothing easy. I mean, I took Italian in foreign language in school. So to me, this is a lot more difficult, because I dived in not knowing really where to start. And it was, everybody's like, just take a diagnostic test. And so I take this diagnostic, that first test, the 2007 one that's for free. And I looked at it and was like, can I cuss on here?
No. Oh, my mom watches this.
Oh, well, I was like, what the? I was like, what is this? Yes. I think I was on games too. What? This goes first? What are you talking about? And it was like a weird game. And
then you're like, wait, it gets harder from here.
It gets harder. And I always thought, I was a really good reader, because I do like to read actual books and understand and comprehend it.
Versus fake books?
Versus books online. I like paper. I like
okay. So you enjoy reading. You would spend
yes.
You would spend your free time reading.
Yes. And I remember getting to the reading comp and I'm like, oh, I got this. This is gonna be easy. No, that was not easy. I can always get the main point questions, but when it came to the rest of them, I got all of them wrong. And I'm like, what? Am I stupid? I really thought I was stupid. And then I'm like, so after doing my first impression of the LSAT was, what did I get myself into? There's no way. I felt very stupid. That there was no, I'm like, how do you even pass this? And then that's when.
And this was in June, correct?
This was in June of
June 2019.
No, 2020. Yes.
2020. Okay.
Yes. Why did I decide to do this during a pandemic? I don't know.
You're like, because I'm home, I have time. Why not?
I was home working during that time. We hadn't come back to the office.
Right, and you couldn't do anything in your evenings. So you're like, I might as well study.
Why not? Go back to school.
So what was your diagnostic score then?
It's 155. And I have
Was it timed or untimed?
That was timed.
Okay.
And I have not, and I hate to say this out loud because not too many people know this, but I have not taken a test since then.
And she's taking the test on Sunday.
And I officially take the LSAT on Sunday, November 8th.
Okay.
But what I mean by that is I've not taken a full test timed. I've taken bits and pieces timed and on-timed and blind review and done that, but I've never taken just the full again because I almost felt traumatized by it.
Right.
That's the best way I can describe it.
And you are preparing for January more than.
Yes. And full disclosure, for me taking November, I am treating it like a prep test. I'm treating it so I can get a feeling of what's going to be on this exam. What does it feel like? So that January, it'll be 8 months of studying. And then now that I feel like I properly know how to study now. And now that from October and November, from when I started out early, when it was just piecemealing it. And so it really comes down to, if I can give anybody any kind of advice, do some research before you bring out your credit card and start buying stuff. Don't do what I did. I bought everything under the sun and spent so much.
Because you would buy something and it wouldn't work, and then you just buy something else.
That's exactly what I did. And I bought the LSAT Max course because when you Google, that's what comes up first. And because I didn't get into these groups and these Facebook groups until after I had already spent thousands of dollars. And then, and I think about too, now that I know the names of my flaws, the Concord flaw of I've already spent this money, might as well stick with it.
But your time is valuable. And that's probably a really hard thing to swallow. So how do you balance that between you spent this money and your time and it's not working?
It's not working. And so that became very unmotivating because, you know, I've already spent all of this money, and I knew that I had this test coming up. I'm like, what's going on? Is it me? That's what I really started thinking about. Is it me? Am I stupid? You know, these are the things I'm going through my head. And to be honest, it was that I wasn't finding what was the style of teaching wasn't right for me. And I think people have got to understand that nothing's cookie cutter about studying for the LSAT. What's right for me might not be right for somebody else. And this is my little joke, and I actually put it, it was a comment on one of your videos that I actually put that finding and researching materials for the LSAT is like going through a few boyfriends before you find a husband. You kind of gotta, you know, find a few before you find, you know, get that right.
I like this part, but I don't like this. I like this, but I don't like. If I could just put you all together, it'd be perfect.
Yes, and that's you know, the only advice I can give out to anybody is do some research first before you get that credit card out, and understand what your learning style.
Samples. Ask for samples.
Yes.
Even from the big companies. Yes.
Or talk to people.
You said there that I want to clarify, which I agree with everything that you said, but depending on how long you have to study, there is value between sticking with something, but don't buy I think what you're saying is don't buy $1,000 course. There's a difference between buying $1,000 course and sticking it out because you spent $1,000 and buying the LSAT trainer for $45 and just focusing on that book for 2 or 3 weeks. Because I do think there is value when you buy like one of those books. A lot of people recommend like actually finishing it and not just being like, oh, well, I didn't make any progress, I'm going to stop reading it. Because if you bounce around too much, that can be harmful.
Right. And so like literally I was doing LSAT Max from June to probably August, I'm thinking September. And at that time I felt no comfortable then from when I first started. Yes, I learned some basics, but I was not able to really do a test.
You learned some LSAT rhetoric, some jargon?
Yes, I learned the words, and that's really about it. I didn't learn how to actually use them
or study.
Or study, because that's the other thing. I properly study. If I got something incorrect, I didn't understand why I got it incorrect or why I was picking those answers. So there's a lot of all these question marks leading up to why there was no value because of not actually comprehending, or I wasn't learning that. I mean, that's the best way to put it. I just really wasn't.
I think what some people do is, especially when we're type A, most of us go into law school are type A, we're used to putting in work and getting results.
Yes.
And so if someone gives us a study plan, we're like, oh, I did that check, did that check, did that check. And it's more of a checklist than actually truly learning. And a lot of us struggle with that, but we think, oh, if we put the time in, we're going to get something out of it. And unfortunately, that's not how the LSAT works.
No, and these last few weeks with getting to know you and your the way that you teach, I've really learned. One, it was going back to Cora. You know how I learn. Like I know that I need to teach because you learn by teaching, or at least that's how I do. I learn better by talking it out loud and putting it down to structure. And then I also learn, what I enjoyed out of your class and what I actually learned more was when we got paired up with different other people, and we were in little small groups, and we were having to read something out loud and then repeat, what did we just read? And it was one sentence, and just see if we were comprehending it. And before, I mean, you got to think of 3 or 4 months of studying. I was not doing that. I was not comprehending and actually regurgitating in my own words what I was reading. And so I think that's very important on the LSAT is you've got to understand what you're reading. If you don't understand it, then you're not going to know what kind of answer you're looking for. And then
I know, like we're going to make it abbreviate, or we're going to do a one-off of Brad Barbay always says, if you can't get the score you want in a time test, or an untimed test, what makes you think you do it in a time test?
Right.
We can change that to say, if you don't understand the stimulus, what makes you think you're going to understand the answer?
Yeah, I know. You're just going any, meeny, miny, mo by then. And Brad's good too, because, you know, because I kept seeing Brad's name on these Facebook groups, and I'm like, all right, who's this guy? And I really like that. He's like, hey, you know, I got some very inexpensive, if you wanted to check out my courses. And he's very, very good at, like, if you need help, here's my cell phone number, call me, or anything like that.
Here,
And
I'm gonna put Brad's number in the comments so you all can, I'm just kidding.
text Brad.
Yeah, I help my students from now. I'm like, just text Brad.
Yes. But he's a good person as far as, you know, when you think about a really genuine good person, especially for beginners. He's got a lot of good stuff out there for beginners that are, what I like to say, are valuable, because they're in my price range, after I've spent lots
They
of
help you,
money.
and they also help you get the basics and kind of figure out what you need to study. So before you like invest in a tutor, or you invest in maybe a different course like 7 Sage or the Demon or the Power Score Bibles, kind of just honestly getting that entry level knowledge to even know where your weak areas are, I think would be very impactful.
I 100% agree with that. I mean, you've got to get those basics down, and after 3 months of studying, I still had no basics. I was just
the basics. What are the basics? What are some basics?
Structure. It's understanding. What's the one thing we do in your class? What's the conclusion? That's the number one thing. And if you can't find the conclusion, you're not going to be able to answer that question. Because majority of every single question that we deal with is, what is the argument talking about? And your argument is your conclusion. And that's your basic. You've got to understand that.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's a strengthening question, weekend, sufficient assumption, necessary assumption, flaw, paradox. I guess paradox could be a statement, but those question types, they're all based on what the conclusion is, what's the support, and how does the support relate to that conclusion, and what can we add to that to either strengthen or weaken it, or what can we take from that based on what we see.
Right. And that's why,
it's like, oh, you finally have the key to the missing puzzle.
Right. It is
the piece missing from the puzzle.
And I'll say now too, I also use Cassidy, her loophole book, which also teaches structure and how to break down a paragraph and words and things. There's some good things in it, and I would say there's some things that I'm having to unlearn, but bad habits, what I like to say. But taking these bits and pieces of learning structure and learning basics, that to me, that's where people need to start. And then let what I call LSAT language, this new foreign language that we were all talking about, you'll learn that after a couple of months of studying. It's not going to be something.
Cora, what does most mean?
Most? More than 50%. What
does some mean?
At least one.
See, she knows stuff.
It's the funniest thing is I'm reading flaw, and I'll like, I know what kind of flaw that is. And, because now I've now memorized some of the big flaws. And like I said, it was like taking a foreign language of learning, and it's hilarious because I watch the news now and I pick apart their arguments, and people don't want to be around me until they're like, you need to take the test and be done with it, because they're getting tired of me talking about
legal flaws and how we talk in real life, where I'm like,
yes.
I even might agree with what someone's saying, but I'm like, just so you know, your support is terrible. Like, it's not valid.
And then they look at you like, what?
Like, that's not what I meant. I'm like, well, it's what you said.
That's a flaw. That's actually a flaw. I know, but this is what I thought you said.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what you thought. Okay, so moving on, you've been on this journey, and you even said that you it sounds like you got discouraged at a point because you were using LSAT Max and it wasn't working. How do you stay motivated to study for this test?
I think a lot of that is it's deep down. You gotta figure out what your why is again. And if your why is just because you want to make all this, bukus of money, then you're kind of off path. And because, not all attorneys are millionaires, not all attorneys make 6 figures. Not all attorneys work in large law firms. Some of them do a lot of pro bono work. Some of them work for the state. So you've got to find out what is your why. And my why is going back to being that veteran and having a disability and being discriminated against and not having a voice. That's my why, and that's what keeps me motivated, because I want to make a change, or at least be part of a change, or be, I want to help.
Okay, I love that. And I think that that is like your overarching motivation of why you keep going. But
Yes.
how do you keep going day to day? So like when you wake up and you don't want to study, or you come home from work and you don't want to study, how do you stay motivated to stay consistent? Because I do think you can keep go. I think there's a lot of us that have this why, and they're listening to what you just said. And like, yeah, I have that. I really want to do this. I have my reason, but my score isn't changing, or it's taking longer than I thought. What advice do you have for those students? That bucket that most of us fall into.
Well, I know I fell into that too, because
Yeah.
because at that point, okay, look back at my why. But the other thing is, one, be okay with taking a day off from studying. That was another thing that I had to actually realize, that it was gorgeous outside and I can go paddleboarding and be okay with it. And so please be okay with having a little fun, and not make LSAT your life. But the other thing is, if what you're currently doing isn't working, then start looking for something that will. So for me, for example, yes, I did try out a couple of different courses that cost me a lot of money. But it was, though all those different courses and all those, the books and everything on YouTube led me to finally find somebody that fits me. And it's like a puzzle piece of when you start finding somebody, if it's a tutor, if it's group classes, you gotta find somebody that works with you. And now I have more motivation now.
Right before you say that, I want to add something. And I think people might hear that, like, but how do you know that something's bad before you start, or you thought it was a good fit? Don't be afraid to ask people that have taken the LSAT, truly join a Facebook group, or truly seek people out and ask more than 2 or 3 people.
Yes.
That's one of my advice. Like, I know that takes time, but in the long run, it's going to save you so much time. Go ask 6, 7, 8 people what worked for you, and start to see some common similarities.
Right.
And ask them why it worked for them.
Because yes, that's a big one. Not just, I don't want to.
People, we're crazy about the LSAT. We've been sitting here talking for like 40 minutes. There's people that have, like, if you've taken the LSAT, you're willing to talk about it. It seems like that's a flaw, but I think it's
and people love to say, hey, I got a 165 and this is what all I'm doing. But they're probably doing a lot more than what they're actually saying. And don't be scared to reach out to them and ask them, what their journey's been like, because they could have had a very similar journey to me, or they got very lucky and got fit with the right person. And that could, if I would have found somebody that was similar to teaching style that Nicole does, back in June, I would think I would be in a different place than I am right now, at least with my understanding and my feeling confident about the LSAT.
One thing that people don't want to hear, but one of the things that I use for motivation when I was studying is, even when I first started studying, I had my whole life planned out.
Mm-hmm.
I had, like, I'm going to study for this. These are the days I'm going to study. This is when I'm going to study. This is when I'm taking my tests. This is when I'm going to have all my applications done. This is when I'm going to go visit my schools. This is the day I'm going to decide when I'm going to go to law school. Then I'm going to go to law school. Then I'm going to do these for 3 years. And this is what I'm going to do my first years after law school. And then eventually I'm going to end up here.
When does life throw that wrench at you?
Like, when I didn't get my first score on my first test.
Yes, that's what happens.
Oh no.
Life is going to throw a wrench into that plan.
And so I just want to tell people, offer yourself grace and treat this like a long journey, because one, if you can score a 165 in 6 months, you can score a 170 in a year, and that will literally change your life. And I if you're going to enjoy that time period, you don't be miserable your whole LSAT journey of studying. Like, if you would, like, I think someone said that they studied like 1 hour, like 5 hours a week for like a year, and and then like the 2 months leading up to it, they picked it up and how significant they did. There is total value of being exposed to the test over a longer period of time and offering yourself grace. So one of my biggest pieces of advice is, like, do not hold on to that deadline.
Yes.
And that's so hard to let go.
I agree with you. And I think that's why I ultimately decided that I was going to take the January test, because one, I knew I wasn't 100% confident. And so now I'm treating it like a prep test. But I knew I wanted more time, and I knew that with more time, I was going to get better. And that would have been,
you weren't maxed out.
Right.
And what is a year? Like, even if you had to wait a year to go to law school, I know that's not the ideal situation, but after COVID 2020, right? Like, what's a year?
And
it's hard for us, especially
yeah.
young folks, to hear that, because we're like, oh, like now I've had to wait a year due to COVID to go to school. And I'm like, well, now I'm not going to start law school till I'm 27. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to be like 30 plus when I graduate law school. And I'm going to
be in my 40s.
But that's the thing is, but I've really made a lot out of these last 2 years, and I've enjoyed this process. And I feel so much more confident and prepared going to law school, where I'm going to go in and kick butt just because I feel energized and I'm I'm looking forward to it, and I've had more time and I have a better score. So it's set me up for success. And yeah, I'm 27 instead of 26, but 5 years from now, what would I regret more? Starting unprepared.
You have the possibility that you might get some amazing scholarships and not have debt.
Don't get me started on that, but yes, I believe in that. And so I tell people, don't put on to their deadline, but you are still, if you let go of, some people struggle of not having a deadline because then they put off studying. Not having a deadline is not an excuse for not studying the same amount or with the same consistency as you would.
You have to study.
Which that's my next question.
Is like, a marathon for this.
What was your study schedule? How often do you study, etc.?
Oh, I for a good while, I was probably studying too much. Right now, I at least get in 2 to 3 hours a day. Traditionally, so, you know, if I have time during work, I will throw in a little bit of studying. I hope they're not watching. But then after work, at least 2 hours before I go to bed. And then on the weekend,
and I get the work thing where you're saying like sometimes you might do a game or a reading contest
or
in the middle of your day
just
to do it and then review it later, like because it just breaks up your day. It's like getting a coffee break.
Yeah, I'm not shoving it in there. And I counted, if I'm watching a video of somebody explaining something, I count that as studying. So I counted that in my time of studying.
That's a good point. On days that I don't feel like studying, I would watch videos too, even if it was just a podcast, just to like get to do something. And it's like my mind's tired, but I want to learn something, or I review things that I've already learned just to like refresh.
Right. And so it really is, it's like this bucket of tools of, you know, of learning the LSAT. It's so many different tools to actually understand it. To be honest, I don't think one tool is going to make, you know, is going to do it. I listen to podcasts when I'm driving, and I know people are probably, what the hell is she listening to? And so I listen to a couple of different ones that I enjoy. And if you go to some of the older podcasts, especially Power Score and what is it, the LSAT?
Thinking LSAT.
Thinking LSAT, that's another one.
I'm a Thinking LSAT groupie.
And I like the Power Score guys because I just want to know what they're drinking. They're always talking about their alcohol drinks.
Okay. So lastly, my question is, one thing when I was studying for the LSAT, I realized that there was not a lot of female tutors out there. And I think one of the barriers of females going to law school is, yes, law schools are 50-50 male-female now. However, does everybody have the same opportunity of studying for the LSAT, having that preparation? I recognize that I had a male and female. I started with the male tutor, but I also got a female tutor because I got different things from them, and there was a lot of benefit for me to have. I really felt more comfortable just with a female tutor because it was a one-on-one relationship. What role do you think the LSAT plays on females? Did you think females tend to struggle with different things? Maybe like you being someone that is a little bit more experienced in coming back to study, so you might be balancing different things. Like you said, like, oh, I might have to sell my house to go to law school. Maybe I shouldn't say that in the video. I don't mean that. But
you're fine, yeah.
Those are very real things and it's really cool that you are a woman that bought your own house. Like that's not the standard of, I mean, we're going that direction, but that's not the norm. And so, yeah, that's kind of a loaded question, but. And like your experience with the military, your perspective with the military too, and all of it. I want to know it all.
I mean, across the board, life is still very white male dominated. In the corporate world, in the military world, in the law firm. And that's been my life for, I'm now 38 years old. That's what I have seen. I mean, just everywhere that I've worked, even the law firm I'm at right now, I run the diversity reports. We actually have a diversity team, which I love because I got to participate in it this year, and I learned so much from what they put together. But when I run these reports and I see our percentages and our numbers, law firms don't have a lot of diversity. They just don't yet. And I think that they can benefit more with having so many different aspects of having more women, having more veterans, having anybody of any kind of race, ethnicity, backgrounds, coming from different parts of life or different parts of the world, because you can bring so much
that might give them
to a client. Say it again.
I said different perspectives that give them different types of
that makes you, because when you have a team that has different perspectives, what does that do? It builds your team up to be better instead of just being all single-minded.
Gives you the all positions on the field, right?
Right.
Like, why do we need 10 people that can bring the same thing to the table?
But you need different people.
Yeah, that's what I ask about. I say all the time. It's like, well, yeah, like they might be technically a little bit more qualified, but we already have someone that can do exactly that. So why do we need another person that can do the exact same thing when we can bring someone else in that brings in this whole new arsenal of tools?
And I think, you brought up something about LSAT tutors. I think you're the only female LSAT tutor that I've actually met and talked to, or even reached out to, or anybody. Everybody else they're male.
No,
so I just realized that.
I don't know like what the big test prep companies are out there. I don't have this information, but I do think maybe a self-employed LSAT tutor is as a female is very like that. I know is not very common. And a lot of it has to do with women tend to take fewer risks, right? Like, or to run your own business. It just tends to be all of these things. And like, if I'm going to law school, why am I going to start this company if I'm going to go to law school? Or why am I going to do it on my own? Like, can I even do this? Is it worth it? Et cetera, et cetera. But for me, it's absolutely worth it because I have met so many amazing women that just need that level of encouragement, accountability, trust with their LSAT tutor, and also to hold them accountable. But whenever you hold them accountable, there's that level of trust there that they value and respect, and they know I value and respect them, and I value and respect that place of life that they're at.
Right.
Because that's something that is really difficult because I think our emotions tend to be a little bit different, and the shame that can come with the LSAT, or the guilt that can come from studying for the LSAT, or when I'm not perfect, I don't want to even pursue, or I don't want to be honest with where I'm at or what I'm struggling with. And we have to overcome a lot of that. Those negative thoughts to be our best.
It's even in the classroom style setting where you have to get over, if I get the wrong answer, if I get the answer wrong, you have to get over that fear of I could be blurting out a wrong answer and get over it, but then understand why you chose that wrong answer. And I think that's what a good tutor does is they help you feel confidence, but okay to be wrong, and let's go over why that was
Fall
wrong.
in love with feedback.
Right. You've got to, because that's how you're going to get better. And I think too, in the classrooms is get over the, being competitive. Don't be, I'm
not me versus you competitive, but be me versus myself competitive.
Yes. So I can definitely say that I've learned a lot just this last month and a half of the correct way of learning, the correct way of studying that I wish I would have known back in June. But you know what? It's preparing me for January.
And hopefully you go into law school then as an even better studier, and hopefully a lot of the mistakes you've made preparing for the LSAT, you can quickly correct or even avoid when you start law school.
100%. And I hope that maybe, during that time, if we're all in law school together, we can still do these Zoom calls.
Like, let's all come in and talk about torts or constitutional law. Let's debate it.
I like that idea. Hint, hint.
So, there's my dog in the background. She's like, all right, Mom, let's go outside. It's Friday evening.
Time for dinner.
All right. So last two questions. One is, where do you want to go to school, or where are you looking at?
UGA, so that's University of Georgia. And the reason why is, one, they are top 20?
25, I think.
Top 25. So they're still they're a very good school. and not very far from Atlanta. And a lot of Atlanta law firms, especially the one I work in, hire UGA students.
Amazing. And then any last words of advice or any last thoughts, or what do you want to leave if people are still listening? What do you want to leave them with?
If you're still listening, the LSAT is, just be patient with it. It's one of those things that you got to be patient with the process. And I think I've heard you say that before too, is be patient with the process.
Offer yourself grace.
Yeah, and because it's a long road to start mastering it, and that's what you want to be doing, is mastering the LSAT, understanding it from the point of view of the people writing it. Don't try to get through it with tips, little tricks and memorization and things like that. Go into it with actually like how you can completely tear it apart and break it down.
Kill it, destroy it.
Kill it.
Kill it. I'm like, kill this. Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be my last bit of advice, is look at the LSAT as something that you can kill it and destroy it, and versus another mountain you got to try to climb up. And
yeah, that's what I say. Breaking up into smaller pieces. I always say, doing well on the LSAT takes consistently doing the small things right, so you can do something really hard.
100% right.
And if you don't consistently do those small things right, you're going to max out, or you're going to plateau. So really dive into those basics at the beginning of your study, and then you'll just have exponential learning from that point.
Yeah, yes.
Right.
Well, I think too, that's where people learn when they start plateauing, that's where they become unmotivated. And that's when you got to really look back in yourself.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Cora.
Thank
I'm
you.
sure it's going to be very motivating for a lot of others.
I really hope so. I hope I can help motivate, the women that are out there and they're like, I'm in my 40s, can I do this? And guess I'm here to say, yes, you can. You can do this in your 40s. You can do this in your 50s. It's possible.